We read from Psalm 97. The heavens proclaim your righteousness, and all the people see your glory. All who serve carved images, those who boast in idols, will be put to shame. All the gods must worship Yahweh. Zion hears and is glad, and the towns of Judah rejoice because of your judgments, O Lord. For you, Lord, are the most high over all the earth. You are exalted above all the gods. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. I thank you so much for the ability to gather here with these people finally again and to share the time of study of your word so that we can get to know, especially today, Lord, you and how you've revealed yourself and what that means for us. Pray that you come upon us. I pray that you inspire me and speak through me. And please let them forget any heresy that I might say as they do. In Jesus' name, amen. Yeah, exactly. And we've got room for another. All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Like I was saying, gosh, am I so glad to see you all. The Zoom thing actually worked maybe better than I thought it was going to for the first half of this year, but it just really is so tremendously great to be back. So very thankful for that. So we're starting a Bible Geeks again. As I announced last week and as was in the email, we are going to be going along with this idea of the Old Testament today's world. So Old Testament theology. We kind of came up with this because we're doing the New City Catechism, and we're going through right now some of the foundational assumptions of our theology. Each week has a question, and we're in the early part of the Old Testament. And so there was, when I was talking to Terry and Nancy and Paul about it, I looked back and I was like, there's this book on my wall that I haven't gotten through yet that's about Old Testament theology for Christians. And I've been meaning to read it. It seems like as good a time as any to go through that. So that became the topic of this particular class. So I'm going to be getting used to the clicker and the lag. So forgive me, I may stop sometimes waiting for this to go. But yes, welcome everybody. So we're doing this, as you've all kind of figured out at this point, in a hybrid format. So there's going to be both in person and then over Zoom. We're going to work out the whole Zoom part. I may have to do some of the Zoom controls every now and then. But I think
the waiting room, or is
I'm doing the waiting room. I have the waiting room right here.
So you see that.
And I have access to the mute button. I also have access to the unmute button. What I'll say to those at home for the live streaming, there's a feature I believe you have called raise hand. You may be able to see that. If you would like to jump in with a question, hit the raise hand. I will be able to see that here, and then I can call on you when I get a moment. So if any of you are away for some week, but you can log in, I'll be sending out the login each week. I will also continue to do what I've done in the past. I will record and put it on YouTube. That will be separate from this live stream recording, which I think Julia will manage on the website. So yeah, that's what I just said. Also, for any of you who need to leave for choir rehearsal at 9:43, just get up and go. You don't need a hall pass or anything. You can leave when you're ready. Okay, so let's get right into it. The other thing I'm gonna say is we are really trying to do this. By we I mean I am trying to do this in 1 hour because that's the time that we had this morning. And also for those, I know many of you are part of the choir. I don't want you to miss that much, especially from getting to the climax and then you've got to go. So I want my part to be 45, 50 minutes. And so I am going to be trying to move through relatively quickly. I might speak too quickly, but the challenge for me is of course to fit all that content in because brevity is, not one of the gifts of the Spirit that I was given. So anyway, let's get right into it. The premise for the class, reading the Old Testament. I was trying to figure out how to title this slide, and I was just like, let me see, can I move?
Sally's interfering.
Yes, I don't know how to move that.
I think you just drag it if it's on your screen.
Yeah, I think.
But is it?
With your mouse.
Is it on my screen? Or is that on the
It's on
local
your
Zoom?
screen.
I don't think so, because I just moved them to the bottom of my screen.
Well, try the gallery on here.
Let's see, let's try this.
Yeah.
Change view.
Yep.
So speaker, what if we do thumbnail? Does that get rid of it? Yeah, that'll be good. Cool. Oh, and then,
Look at all those people.
yeah, good. This is good. All right. So, yeah, I was just like, reading the Old Testament is, an experience, right?
Yeah.
So, we will sometimes see things we're very aware of, God that can sometimes seem violent or angry. We have the picture of Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're sometimes like, we know Jesus, and this God seems, I don't know, Yahweh, what would Jesus do? You get a little bit, you don't quite know what to make of it. Same thing, you're reading through these long lists of commands. I, forgive anybody who said, I'm having trouble falling asleep, I'm gonna open to Leviticus chapter 10. Because you're going through things about skin, and you should go to the priest if you have a skin disorder. It's like, I know, I would go to the doctor if I had a skin thing. Why are you going to the priest? We're actually gonna talk about that. But the same thing about food and clothes, you can only have one thread. Why is Almighty God, who's got Lord of over all the cosmos, worried about the fabric in my shirt? And why? We'll talk about that too. But it can seem very disconnected. We got all these stories about this king and that king and that king and that king, and basically the thing to know about the monarchs is, except for 3 of them, they were all bad. But we read about all of these. Bonus points for anybody who can name good kings.
Josiah.
David, half of Solomon. Josiah.
Yeah.
And Hezekiah.
Hezekiah.
They're your good kings. David, Hezekiah, Josiah, and half of Solomon. But the rest of them, okay, could we just know that they're bad? No, there's these long histories. And then we have prophets, including what we even call the minor prophets, that are speaking to these kings. Very interesting thing. By the way, June, I know you're on. Thank you for sending me that podcast. It was excellent. And one of the things that was in this podcast about Isaiah that June sent me was, you look at the prophets. If you put them on a timeline, there's basically a big cluster around the fall of Samaria for the northern kingdom, and a big cluster around the exile. But that's pretty much when you see the prophets speaking, not perfectly, but that's where most of it's happening. But so these many prophets are coming at these important points in Israelite history, and it's really hard to connect. You open up the book of Obadiah and you read that, and you're like, okay, so where am I in the histories and what's happening? So the Old Testament is not really that easy to read. Now, the challenge for us is that we believe the Bible was written for us as Christians. So this is one, for us Reformed folk, we're very familiar with this one. All scripture is God-breathed. It's profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, training in righteousness, so that everyone who belongs to God, present company included, may be proficient and equipped for every good work. So this one's a very well-known verse. Incidentally, this is Paul writing to Timothy. At the time, the New Testament's not completely written, nor compiled. So the scriptures that Paul would be referring to specifically at that time is the Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament. That doesn't mean it doesn't apply to the New Testament. It's just but what is Paul thinking of when he's writing this? So the Old Testament is this scripture that we believe is for all believers for all time, including us today. But, and I'm going to borrow a quote from one of my favorites, John Walton. You've heard me talk about him quite often. And this is sort of the summary of all of his work right here in one sentence. The Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. That distinction right there for us, as we just described, it's profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, so that we can be equipped for everything. But it was written by authors. We're in the 20th century, 21st century after Jesus. This is like the 21st century before Jesus, at least where some of this, the earliest dating of the earliest books goes to, all the way up through maybe 500 years before Jesus or so. So we, the 21st century people, are not at the implied audience of the text. It's not okay, so I'm going to, Yahweh, I'm going to inspire the psalmist, and I'm going to say, and then he stretched out the heavens. Okay, the person's going to write that. And everybody at the time is going to be like, okay, I don't know what that, he stretched out the heavens, sure. But then, in the middle of the 20th century, when we discover Big Bang cosmology, we now know what Psalm 19 actually meant the whole time. God is not whispering to us 21st century people through the Old Testament, through people over thousands of years, to tell us something that nobody else could have known beforehand. So we can fall into this trap of thinking that it's being written to us, but it didn't necessarily mean something to the people at the time. So this is like the Big Bang cosmology idea. God was speaking to the people at the time, using the author at the time. It had to mean something to somebody then. Or else God's just speaking gibberish for thousands of years. And so the challenge for us is actually we have to understand the context in which the author was speaking and the audience to whom the author was speaking to then really get the message. We're the ones who have to engage in the hard work. And so that's why we love our scholars. That's why we have scholars. Because this stuff would be, and it's very boring, it's very difficult to go through the Enuma Elish and read all of that and then try and understand the ways in which the ancient culture is being reflected in the Bible and then how to translate that. But that's what we're called to do in order to really understand what's being said in the Bible. So the main focus for this class is going to be these two questions. How would ancient people have understood what's written in the Old Testament? And then how as we, as contemporary, 21st century people, how can we transfer that understanding to our particular context? And of course, I'm going to be able to do this in 6 hours, 1 hour over 6 weeks, obviously. This is, of course, people have spent lifetimes on this. So this is going to be quite obviously an abbreviation, but this is what we're going to try and go after. A few things I could say by way of recommendation, 2 resources. So that book that I mentioned, I've got it right here. If you want to come check it out after the class, you can check it out if I can find the pocket in my backpack. But yeah, so this one here, Old Testament Theology for Christians, I believe it was published not too long ago. This was 2017, I think. 2017, by John Walton, that conveniently, I had 6 weeks and he has 6 chapters in his table of contents. And then also the NIV application commentary series. I highly recommend this one to any of you who feel like I really want to get into a deep sort of Bible study in a particular book, and I want to understand the culture that it was coming from. I don't speak Greek and I don't speak Hebrew. How do I do that? This commentary series is actually excellent at that. And I did notice the one time I've been up in Pastor Paul's office, he's got many of those volumes on his wall. I have many of them as well electronically. So yeah, I would, the biggest flaw in the series is that it uses the NIV, but nothing's perfect. So I was supposed to give a little bit more of a laugh. Even though am I supposed to say that because we're sticking with the NIV, I think?
But we're doing the new.
Oh, the new NIV, even better. But yeah, I would encourage you, pick up one of these volumes, read along a book of the Bible with it. I think you'll really enjoy it.
How many are there?
How many books of the Bible are there, Chuck?
There's one for each?
Almost. The series is almost complete. Some of them have 2 volumes. So, and I think Psalms has 3.
Oh, I'll be right on that.
I'll bet you. All right. So the class outline, the 6 weeks of what I'm going to be going through. So the first one is going to be about who is God. How do we understand Yahweh among the other gods of the ancient Near East? If you ever see A&E, what I mean is ancient Near East, we're talking about the geographical area in which the Old Testament would have taken place. Second one, creation, cosmos, humans. What is God's purpose for us? What do we see in the Old Testament there? Third one, law and covenant. A whole lot of the Old Testament is dedicated to laws and dedicated to covenant. What's this importance and significance of that? We'll hear about Hittite vassal treaties. It's going to be great. And now you all are going to skip that class because I said Hittite vassal. Then the temple. So like I talked about before, I have a skin problem. I go to the doctor. And this time you have a skin problem, you go to the priest. What's the point of the centrality of the temple? What did it represent? And then finally, the final two, and I'm thinking to myself, if I'm gonna get in trouble in this class, it's gonna be in these final two. How does the Old Testament talk about sin, evil, and salvation? There's a whole lot, all the, things that are very relevant to our understanding of salvation come through in the Gospels and in the letters. The Old Testament's understanding is different, and I think if we get into understanding that, we can see many of the ways in which Jesus fulfills that, that aren't necessarily emphasized as much in, say, Luther. So we'll be going through the Old Testament conceptions of sin, evil, and salvation in the final two classes. Okay, so this is just a quick outline for today. We're going to get into some ancient ideas about the gods, the similarities between Yahweh and those other gods. How do we detect the ancient cultural context in the Old Testament? And then we're going to see the differences. The pattern that's going to happen through this is we're going to see similarities between the Old Testament and the ancient Near East in a lot of ways. And then the differences are going to be the point. So when you see what's similar, then you're going to be able to see, okay, this is the way in which they would have thought about it. And then these differences would have really stood out to ancient people. And so that's kind of the pattern that we'll follow through this. So some similarities and then some unique aspects and why those unique aspects are important. And then finally, we'll just do a summary of, what did God reveal about himself to us in the Old Testament? All right. So who is the God of the Old Testament? What I want to ask here, what words do you associate with God? Just generally throw them out there. I say God, you think?
Omniscient.
Okay, I hear holy, I hear omniscient. Creator, yep. Sovereign. Father. Judge. These are good ones. Good, yep.
Almighty.
Almighty. Love. Faithful. Yeah, these are great words. You people read the Old Testament. Right, so holy, sovereign, father, good. These conceptions of God, there's, at this point in my slide, I was like, depending upon what I'm hearing, I'm either going to say, nice job, you read the Old Testament, or say, yeah, okay, so that's a lot of what we think in the 21st century, but the ancients would have thought differently, but I love you guys. You know what you're talking about.
We've been around you.
That's true. If only I'm responsible for that, I would be happy. I guess it's all the other stuff that you've studied that makes you even inspired to come to something like this. That gets you there. All right. So understanding the God of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is an ancient Near Eastern document. It was written in that time by those people. So we need to understand the historical context in order to understand the things that make Yahweh unique. And then the subtle differences between the similarities. So ancient views of the gods, we're going to start here. Commonly held belief is that one of the differences between the Israelite religion and the religion of the ancients is polytheism versus monotheism. So this is your Greek lesson for today. Theism, God, mono being one, poly being many. These are words I'm sure you're familiar with. So it is quite clear, and I think we all learned this in elementary school, at least I did, these ancient religions were polytheistic. So we're certainly familiar with the ancient Greek and Roman gods. The ancient Near East and the Egyptian ones, you probably did like a social studies unit in third grade on ancient Egypt, and you would have seen that there. There were many gods. There's a pantheon, a way of describing like the assembly of gods. These multitude of gods, as you'll probably remember, were known for how they were manifest in the world. So there's something like, there's a god of wine, and there's a god of the air, and there's the god of the sea. You got like Neptune or Poseidon. And I don't know, throw some other ones out there. Whatever.
The sun.
Yeah, sun god.
The weather.
What? Right, Vale, storm god. Yep. So the
Love.
yes, there was, or if you could call it that. Right. So these different manifestations in the world were described as attributes of particular gods. something I really want to get through, ancient worldview, this is going to come up a lot. There's no such thing as what we call the supernatural in ancient cultures, like we think of it today, because everything was done by these gods. So you have the gods, the god of this, the god of that, the god of this, the god of that. And those gods are responsible for whatever is happening in this phenomenon. What's happening in the sea is what Poseidon's up to in the sea. What's happening with the sun is what, Ra is up to with the sun. What's happening with the storms, because Baal's hungry and you haven't fed him. Not even kidding. We'll come up with this a little bit further, but this idea in the ancient world, the great symbiosis, where humans were made to fulfill the needs of the gods. And the gods would send messages that would be divined through the priests. And so if something's going wrong, like our crops aren't growing, the priests in the temple would, do the divination, figure out, okay, just to be flippant about it, yeah, Baal's hungry. And that's why he's not strong enough to make the storms to send the rain. We have to make the sacrifices. Might make a little bit more sense now why there's all these sacrifices. They honestly felt like they were satisfying the needs of the gods. So there wasn't anything like weather patterns. Well, honestly, you know what? The humidity actually is the problem. Or, the wind, we have all these predictive weather models that tells us why it's not storming or why it is storming and when the next ones are going to happen. That's not the way they thought of things. This idea of regularity in the world, a natural world, for which something could be supernatural because it's different than the law of gravity or, Newtonian mechanics or whatever. That didn't exist. Everything was done by the gods. So when you even look in the Old Testament, have you heard the term signs and wonders? It's not the same thing as miracles. Signs and wonders are the gods doing fantastic things that are slightly out of the ordinary for what the gods would normally do. But the gods are always acting. A miracle is, and I took this as the Oxford English Dictionary, events that appear inexplicable by the laws of nature. But in the ancient period, there's no laws of nature like that. It's all the gods. So this distinction we make between natural, regular, orderly, predictable, and then thing that is above that didn't exist back then. They didn't think in these categories. It was all these multitude of gods.
So the gods were considered part of the natural events.
They were. I'm going to hesitate a little bit to even affirm all of that because you use the word natural, because that's a category that we have.
Right.
There is no, natural, it's the gods.
So they can do whatever.
Everything, whatever we would call natural is the gods. Whatever we call supernatural, it's the gods. It's all the gods. And there's many of them. So you have these gods of the certain phenomena, sun god, storm god, and vegetation god. And we also know of a hierarchy, right? Who was the head of the Greek gods?
Zeus.
Yes, say you know this one. This right here, artist rendering of the statue of Zeus at Olympia, doesn't exist anymore. Too bad too, that would be really interesting. But this is one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world Herodotus wrote about. I really want to digress into a survey of what the other 6 were. We have others. Jupiter is the head of the Roman pantheon. Ammon is the head of the Egyptian one. Another thing to know, the gods were, so in this hierarchy, Zeus is the chief god, but you also have these cosmic deities, like Zeus. You have national, and you can even have clan gods. So gods of the family, there would be idols that some families would have that would be in a small kind of temple for the family. And then there were these national gods. Acts chapter 19, great is Artemis of the Ephesians. So Ephesus had the temple of Artemis, also one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. But Artemis was their god. Marduk was the god of Babylon. So there were this hierarchy of gods. You had sometimes a clan or a family god. You had these national or geographic deities, and then you had the supreme ones that were over everything. So you have many gods. You have a hierarchy of gods. Gods were also warriors. This is one that we're somewhat familiar with. Pastor Paul talked about this last week, just tangentially. But this scene here off to the left is a stone carving from the Enuma Elish, one of the creation narratives in the ancient Near East. This is Marduk on the right, slaying Tiamat on the left, and then Marduk used the entrails of Tiamat to create the world. So we're all on kind of.
Now we know.
Exactly. It's like, it makes, everything makes sense now, right? And so yeah, gods would go to war with each other. So you got this hierarchy, you've got this competition in the hierarchy. Gods would go to war. This divine war is also part of many creation stories. Anyone, Clash of the Titans, Battle of the Titans? That is the Greek divine war that resulted in the creation of the world. Eventually, Zeus and the Olympians are victorious over the Titans, and that's where everything comes from. Another way in which this played out in the ancient world, when you were fighting somebody else, it was you versus them, and it was your God versus their God. And you would win or lose based on basically two factors. If your God was strong enough, because you satisfied the needs of your God better, and if your God was happy with you, because you satisfied the needs of the God well. So if you weren't making the appropriate sacrifices or doing the right things, then you might lose in battle, because your God's either just not going to help you or your God is going to be weaker than the other God. So it really was kind of a proxy war. They would think of it as, my God can beat up your God. You can see a little bit of this even in the book of Judges, actually. But we won't go there, because if we go down that rabbit hole, we'll hit questions I can't answer. All right. And then
You see that in like some of the games that kids play where they have powers and.
Yeah, right. No, kids see that. I remember doing stuff like that. My powers were definitely like better than everybody else. And then last one, the ancient gods were creators as well, sort of like we just talked about. Every one of them would have thought of the gods as being responsible for creation. So on the right, we're actually going to go into this in a lot more detail next week, but this is a painting of the Egyptian geography of the universe. So you have Nut, the sky goddess. So the sky with the stars is actually the torso of Nut, the sky goddess. You have Geb, or Jeb, don't know which, the earth god. And Geb and Nut used to be a thing, and now they're not anymore. It's kind of complicated. They kind of want at each other. Shu is keeping them apart, because otherwise everything's going to collapse, because they don't like each other. So Shu, the god of air, is keeping separate the dome.
Well, the heavens from the earth.
The heavens from the earth being held up by the air god.
How about that?
So, and this is an actual painting from thousands and thousands of years ago.
Well, they needed an explanation for the things that they lived.
And I can guarantee you, if you showed an ancient person, ancient Israelite, this picture, this would make sense to them. And if you show them a picture of our blue Earth satellite photo, they have no idea what they're looking at. It would make no sense at all. And so that's the cultural divide between us and the ancient world, the people who wrote the Bible, and us now. Okay, so the ancient views of gods, I have something in the chat. Hello, chat. Is Marduk wearing a watch on his wrist in that battle? Or is it a compass? What's he wearing? Appears to be a sundial. I don't know. Or maybe, you know what? I'm gonna take that back, Kevin. I've got no clue what that is. It's probably some kind of jewelry. It does look maybe a little bit like Marduk's Submariner, though. All right. So, ancient views of gods that we just talked about. There's a multitude of gods in a hierarchy. The way their manifestation in the world is how you know them. They're warriors. They're creators. Now, we, of course, know the Israelite religion was completely monotheistic and rejected the idea of a divine pantheon. Right? Come on, you came to Bible Geeks, you know it can't be that easy. The easy answer is never the answer here. All right, let's get into this.
That's what God wanted them to be.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a reminder
Over
that
and over and over
they
again.
were in that other framework. with all the
Exactly.
gods. And he even mentioned them in the present tense, not
Mhm.
always in the past, or you thought that, but.
you look at this command, the first commandment, I am Yahweh your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall not have other gods before me.
But the golden calf would be okay.
All right, exactly.
Notice he said before me,
Uh-huh.
not any other God, but any other God before me.
Does it actually deny that other gods exist?
No,
It doesn't. You see this a lot. In fact, now we know that the worship of other gods, this is what we were just saying, was prohibited and was severely punished. There's no question about that. But the acknowledgement or belief in the existence of other gods or divine beings actually seems to be widespread. You could make an argument that after the exile, maybe it went away. We'll talk a little bit
there are all
about
those
that.
little demons running around though.
Yep. So the Israelites saw a divine pantheon too, and we'll go into some of these examples in a bit. But they saw it differently than the ancients, because the ancients had all of these gods that were kind of fighting for each other, vying for power. In the Israelite conception, this is an absolute monarchy. This is a dictatorship. Yahweh is in charge, and the rest of these are completely worthless. The main difference that we're going to see is that whereas in the ancient Near East you would worship many gods, it was kind of expected that you would worship the gods of the clan when you were in that area or the nation. Other gods, other nations' gods existed too. You would never do that in the Israelite religion. There was only one God worthy of worship, and that's Yahweh. But there was the conception of these other divine beings. So in the opening of Psalm 29, we see, ascribe to the Lord, O sons of the mighty, the Bene Elim, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength, ascribe to the Lord the glory of his name, worship the Lord in holy array. Sons of the mighty, Bene Elim, literally sons of God, is what that phrase will mean. This is the same phrase that's used in the ancient Near East to talk about the other lesser gods in the divine pantheon. The psalmist here in Psalm 29 just casually brings it up. Yep, they're there. I'm going to give a command to the sons of God to worship Yahweh. It's not derisive. It doesn't say they don't exist. It's just there. Assumed. Well, of course, the sons of God should worship Yahweh.
It does say that the idols are worthless.
Does say the others are. Now you're going to the part where I think, so that would be like Isaiah 40 through 55.
I know it's mostly the New Testament, but it
Yeah.
doesn't say it.
But that part, in the exile in particular, here's what I think is happening there. If you look at these, so this psalm right here is dated like 10th century BC. This is around the time of David. That part of Isaiah in particular, the most strongly monotheistic part of the Old Testament, is coming out of the exile. It's about 500 years later. Now, why did they go in exile?
Because they
They
went
screwed up.
I mean, for the most part, it's exactly that, Mark. It's because they were worshiping other gods. And it seems like there's a very strong theological corrective. Like, where were we going wrong? Where the Northern Kingdom kept on building high places and altars and temples to whomever. Southern Kingdom held off a little bit, but they still couldn't help themselves. The main thing, the covenant violation, and what is the major covenant violation is the worship of the idols. So they're sent to their room to think about what they've done, all right, for 70 years. And coming out of it, the theology that you see in the second part of Isaiah, and then Ezra and Nehemiah as well, very, very protective against anything that could possibly be construed as worshiping of other gods. Even in the Psalms that come a little bit later, you don't get a complete rejection still. But you start to see that language about the idols, deriding the idols. That doesn't really show up until like Psalm 82, which is like right before the exile takes place. So, all right, yep, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. For the sake of time, I'll just go through these examples quickly. You all remember, I think, the opening of the book of Job, right, where you have the other divine beings there. 1 Kings 22, you may not be as familiar with this one. This is Micaiah's vision of Yahweh on the throne, the whole host of heaven beside him. This is the lion spirit. Like, God puts a question out there. Okay, so who am I going to send? And this spirit's like, I'll go be a lion spirit in the mouth of the prophet. And then Yahweh says, okay, go. So, yeah, and then just a brief thing here too. Hello, Jude. You were here and then you were there.
Omnipresent.
Yeah, right. So these are different than angels. There is a Hebrew word for angel. It is not used here. The Bene Elohim and the Malach are not the same things. Okay, so is there anywhere in the Old Testament where worship of the heavenly beings is permitted or encouraged?
Yes.
Okay, I actually expected to know pretty quickly after that, and then I was like, maybe I have made them hesitate too much with my previous question. So, sorry, Chuck, the answer is no.
Heretic.
All right. Do the Israelites do it anyway? Yes, they do. Does it go over well? No, it does not. So, right, the golden calf, they're almost wiped out. You have Elijah and the prophets of Baal, in which ultimately the 450 prophets of Baal are slaughtered. You have the Moabite gods in Numbers, where there's a plague upon Israel until all of those who are worshiping the Baal of Peor are, Phineas and the spear and so it doesn't go over well when they do that. So worshiping of these gods was never part of the Israelite religion. That would be a very distinct thing between the ancients and the Israelites. But they certainly believed in the conception that these other gods were there. It wasn't a denial of their existence, it was a denial that they were worthy of worship. That's why my opening slide, Yahweh the Incomparable, is kind of the way you would look at this. So the key point is when we're reading the Old Testament, we're reading a document that's written in that cultural milieu, had an idea of the divine pantheon. And the Israelites at least seem to share in part this idea, and their texts reflect that. But Yahweh is not just one among the other gods. He is above all of the other gods. So this is what I read in the opening. Your judgments, O God, for you, O Lord, are most high over all the earth. You are exalted far above the other gods. That would be your major distinction.
So Ryan, can I just make, so when you say he's exalted above all the other gods, it sort of implies that the other gods exist.
Exactly. Yep. That
You
would.
missed that part in your travels.
We'll bring it later on.
So was my yes correct?
Nope, your yes was not correct. This is actually where I would point you to say your yes was incorrect.
And don't talk to Chuck, he doesn't know anything.
Yeah. Chuck and I are competing for resident heretic right now. So he might have pulled ahead for a second. I'll get back there before we're done. Okay. So understanding this divine counsel already also helps us make sense of some of these other passages. I want to stop it. This is a brief digression, but I think it's important. Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image."
Yeah.
So who is us?
Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Oh, we may have heard the explanation that this is a dialogue within the Trinity, right?
We heard about that last week.
I was gonna not name anything in particular, but based on the presuppositions I've been laying out here, what's wrong with reading it that way?
There wasn't a Father, Son, and there wasn't a Son and a Holy Spirit in way back.
There certainly was a spirit.
Yeah, they didn't have.
There was, but in their theology,
So that's us reading our theology into it.
that's us reading Trinitarian theology into it. The again, going back to the assumptions at the beginning, the text had to mean something to the people who wrote it and to the audience it was written to. How would those people have understood it? Or are we going to claim that they couldn't understand their Bible for 2,000 years? Was God trying to reveal something to them or not? Was God whispering?
Is it like I'm the chief god of all the gods and bear with me in this?
It's
Or was he just speaking in terminology that they would understand?
yeah.
Not
That's,
necessarily what was true, but under their understanding.
yeah, so this is an interesting theological question. I'm not, I want to get to something that goes after that in particular. I'm not so bothered by, let's say Yahweh is saying to the divine beings, let us make humankind in our image. We could have a theological discussion about whether that's problematic or not. I'm actually not that bothered by it. I'm thinking of Psalm 8, where, when I look at the world, the work of your hands, what are humans that you're mindful of them, son of man, that you care for them? You made them a little lower than the gods.
Oh, it doesn't say angels?
That's your translator.
Ah.
Made him a little lower than the gods. The distinction of, humankind, is basically, it's a distinction between us and the rest of creation, but not necessarily us and the other beings. So the image of God and what that means is actually going to be next week. We'll talk about that. But I think you can look at other places in the Bible and say that, the image, if I forecast a little bit, the status of reflecting God into the world, like that function is just as carried by some of these divine beings as it is by humans. So that's why it's certainly a debatable proposition. You can jump in if you want.
There's a third one that I had just learned from a very distinguished Hebrew or Jewish scholar, and said our image was, he had just created the animals. And so he was talking to the animals, let's make a creature that's both, a creature that's bigger than that. That's because they didn't have the Trinity idea.
Right,
So
haven't heard that one
before. I had never heard of it.
Us in our image, you're not making them in the image of the animal.
Well, they'd be a creature and godlike, and they would have the creativity and stuff. It was an interesting, just threw it out there. I never heard of it before.
Yeah. I got a question from Kevin. If the God are gods of the various aspects of the world, then how could they have been present in a council with God before he created those things? Yeah, it's a good question. There's a couple ways I can answer that. The first is okay. How do I do this without getting too far ahead of myself? So the Genesis account, I guess the way that I would want to answer that, the Genesis account is not an exhaustive accounting of all of the creation of all material things. The Genesis account is telling us about the why for the creation of the world that we are in. So I don't think it records everything that was ever created. And so those gods could have been created that way. The other one is, though, that this could be a difference between the conception of the Israelite pantheon and the rest of the ancient Near East, where they were, you don't really see in the Israelite description of the divine beings that there is a divine being of wine, and there's a divine being of war, and there's a divine being of all of these other aspects, the crops, in the way that we would see in the rest of the ancient Near East. So I don't know if it actually ends up being problematic in that sense, but those are two, I guess, quick, not particularly thoughtful responses to your question. So.
Because it's there, does it mean they existed?
I would say so.
Because
And then-
if he was speaking in a language they would understand, in a framework they would get, because you're talking to people a lot later than the
Yeah.
actual creation.
For the ancients, of course Yahweh has a council. How could Yahweh not have a council? He's a God. He's a big God. And so it's almost just assumed it would have made plenty of sense to them, kind of at least taking the idea of your statement there, that would happen and you could just assume their existence. But it wasn't like on the 2.5 day God created the divine beings. Like we don't see that in Genesis.
I like your idea. It's not exhaustive. Genesis doesn't have everything.
It's I think this is us trying to import our categories again onto asking Genesis to answer 17th, 18th, 19th century questions when it was answering questions of the people to whom it was written. And there's revelation in there for us, but the revelation isn't to kind of torture the text in answering scientific questions. It's to understand the questions they had and then what answers they give it. Steve?
Yeah, Brian, I understand about not reading back Trinitarian values into the Old Testament, especially with regards to the Son, but what do we do with Genesis 1:3? The Spirit of God was hovering. Ruach, that's the second person of the Trinity, so speak to that.
Yeah, well, so I'll say,
Did he mean us when he says the Spirit and I?
as in like us humans, or?
The Spirit of God is different than God?
So, no, this is a good question, one I haven't pondered particularly much. The first thing I will tell you is I certainly believe that the Trinity existed at the creation. But the question is, what was meant by those words by the author? I would like to be careful enough in this that I'm going to just call that a good point that I need to follow up on.
Okay.
Because no, you raised a very good question there. And I'm afraid that if I shoot from the hip, I'm gonna get it wrong. So I will follow up on that. I know in the commentaries they addressed that I skipped over it because I was trying to get to the part I wanted to talk. So, all right. So let's see. Oh, I need this to wake back up. Or not, just go this way. Oh, maybe it's because, yeah. All right, so does this mean that the Israelites were polytheists? No. It was never polytheistic because they are never worshipped. You got in trouble if you worshipped anything other than Yahweh. And so this is not polytheism. We went over this already. God appears to have used the prophets to implore them to shed themselves of any sort of syncretism that led to the exile in the first place. So these are, Nancy,
Well,
these.
the author was not gonna argue with people about whether these gods existed or not. But he wanted to make the point that God was the biggest and the most powerful and the God we should worship and forget about all the other ones.
Exactly.
But I'm not gonna argue the point with you.
Yes, exactly. It's not that, God is not trying to disabuse them of any notion of other divine beings existing. That's not where we are. Those aren't the grounds upon which the Israelites were different. They were different on the grounds of only one gets worshipped. That was radical.
And we are so, at least I was raised so black and white in these things, that it's hard to expand my thought that the Bible would not bother talking about that point. It would
Right.
just emphasize the truth of God.
And
Let
then-
the other things go where the culture took them.
Yep.
And allow the people the grace of that.
And why does this ultimately matter is things like, okay, in Genesis 1, when you read, let us make humankind in our image, what do we understand? Or let me try this one. This one, Psalm 82. You read through and you get to Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine assembly. He judges among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Provide justice for the needy and the fatherless. Uphold the rights of the oppressed and destitute. Rescue the poor and needy. Save them from the power of the wicked. They do not know or understand. They wander in darkness. I said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High. However, you would die like men and fall like any other ruler. What on earth does that mean? If you don't have an understanding of the kind of cultural context and the Old Testament does not reject the existence of these other divine beings, and in fact, sometimes they have a role. Jesus quotes, I said you are gods. John chapter 10, he quotes Psalm 82. So if you're reading the New Testament, you're like, oh, where's that reference? And you read that reference, you're like, I'm just gonna close this and put it back. And I'm gonna say Jesus knew what he was talking about. That's where this can be really helpful in expanding our understanding of what was actually being said.
But then he said, it's not written in your law, but I said, ye all are gods and sons of the Most High.
Right, does it not say in your law, I think, I said you are gods. And he's using that as in a very specific and I think complicated way as a defense of his own divinity. Even though, so what's happening is they're coming up to stone him and they're saying, okay, you said that you were equal to Yahweh, so we're gonna stone you. That's a stonable offense. And then his response is, doesn't your own word say, I said you are gods? And if he called those to whom the word of God came gods, then, why do you get angry at me when I say I'm from God? And so I wrote a whole paper on this one in grad school because this troubled me. Because I was like, is he really saying that the whole point is no, calling myself God doesn't really mean anything. You're a God, you're a God, you're a God. We're all gods. It's no big deal. Like, is that really what Jesus is saying? And it's if I could come back to answer that for you, I wanted to I have the if I could find it, like I wanted to basically just read the concluding paragraph from my paper on that. But I think that, I think he's using it differently than that. He's not appealing to this idea of polytheism as a defense of his own divinity. There are some interpretations that say that they're actually humans. I don't think that's right. But if I'm completely honest with you, I'm struggling to remember exactly how I finished that paper. But it was better than what I'm giving you right now. Yeah.
I pointed us earlier to Psalm 82, and that's such a cool psalm because it says, it addresses this, the gods, small g, know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness.
Yep.
I said, you are gods.
Mhm.
You're all sons of the Most High, but you will die like mere mortals. You'll fall like another ruler.
Yep.
Psalm 82. Asaph, love that guy.
Yep. So.
And it has very interesting implications for how we look at how other people view God or how other people worship God or how other people, because they come from a context. That God can speak to them in different ways in the context that they are.
Yes.
And that it's such we're not to judge that, but speak God's truth and love. It really has implications for how we relate to others. Interesting.
I really now just want to answer this for you, because I brought it up. I'm gonna stop share for a second and see if I can find it on here because I can't find, I'm not getting it up on my phone. But I'm also, is it in here?
Okay, Tim?
If I can't, like all of my stuff is supposed to be in this one folder and I can't find it in there. So we'll.
No, would you do it?
All right, I just for the sake of time, I'm gonna keep going and I will send that out, or maybe we'll do a little
What if he knows his phone?
a little digression at the beginning of next week to finish this one up. And then where's that mute button? No, do I want to make Tim Gable co-host? 10 minutes. We'll.
Muted everybody.
There. How about that, Kevin?
Nope, you're still, you just have to cross it.
That's coming from here. I think should be able to hear me now.
Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
You're not talking, so.
Okay.
Yes,
Good.
the answer's yes, good.
So, all right. Let's see. I think I've gone through all of this already since we've got only 5 minutes or so. I want to see if we could get through some of the things that are unique about Yahweh relatively quickly. So things that would be very different about Yahweh from the ancient conception. Yahweh is jealous. His plan can't be broken or changed by anybody else. He's a redeemer. He has a nurturing relationship with his people. And of course, he is holy. Those would be some of the major differences.
I would think that Zeus and all the other gods were very jealous of each other too.
Let's go into that. Here's the way in which I'm using that. Yahweh demands exclusive worship rights over and above any others. This is not how the ancient Near East have looked through it, looked at worship. You would go to the Temple of Dionysus and you would also go to the temple of Zeus. And you might go to the temple of Artemis. And Zeus wasn't mad that you went to the temple of Artemis. Zeus cared that you went to the temple of Zeus. And if you didn't go to the temple of Zeus, now Zeus is mad. But it wasn't so much like these other gods didn't get any worship. Whereas Yahweh, if you go into the temple of Moloch, how's Yahweh going to react to that? So that's the way in which I'm using the word. I think it's fair to say that maybe this isn't the best word for it because they did get jealous of each other sometimes and they fight and have petty bickering. But it's really the exclusive worship rights. I guess I choose the word jealous because that's the word that Yahweh uses. You will not bow down to the other gods, for I, Yahweh, am a jealous God. For you will not bow down and worship to another God, for Yahweh is jealous, is his name. Yahweh, your God, is a jealous God in your midst. So that's the self-description, and so that's why I use that word. Not jealous of the other gods, but jealous of the worship sent their way. So that's the explanation I just gave here. Forgive me for speeding through this, but I'm looking at the clock. The unchallengeable plan. So the ancient Near Eastern gods are going to bicker, backstab, betray, get in each other's way, prevent them from carrying out their wills. But Yahweh gets his way no matter what. So this passage right here is one of the best descriptions of this. Nebuchadnezzar, when his sanity returns to him, saying, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High. Praised and honored the one who lives forever, for his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants on the earth. Saying, there is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, what are you doing? But Yahweh gets his way, and this is not the case with the other ancient gods. This would have been a difference. And especially in war, this would be a very strong claim. Yahweh is a redeemer. So in the ancient Near East, the word redeemer is almost never used in the ancient text to describe the gods. And it never pertains to a people, whereas God is, of course, the redeemer of Israel. So he restores Israel on many occasions, the Exodus, the exile, those fun judges cycles. Where the people are oppressed, they call out to Yahweh for help. Yahweh sends a judge, the judge delivers them, there is peace in the land. And then they do evil and then they're oppressed again and so on and so forth. But there's redemption in each one of those cycles. We'll skip over that because we'll get to that later. Yahweh nurturing his people. The Old Testament is replete with these examples of Yahweh's love and care for Israel. You don't find parallels like this in the ancient Near East, where the gods care so deeply for the people like Yahweh cares for his people. So a few things here, you're probably very familiar with these, but I have loved you with an everlasting love is not going to be said about Marduk and his people. That's not how it goes. Lamentations, this is like the exile, Jeremiah looking upon the sacking of Jerusalem. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, his mercies never come to an end. Is not anything like an ancient conception of God. Hosea, going back to, pay and retrieve Gomer and bring her back is the analogy for Israel and Yahweh. Exodus, so the Sinai covenant, you will be priestly kingdom, holy nation, treasured possession. This is an extremely stark description of Yahweh relative to the ancient gods. And then this one, by the way, memorize this one, folks, if you haven't already, because you see this one everywhere. I will walk with you and be your God, and you will be my people. Like that kind of divine presence with them is very unique to Yahweh. This is in contrast to that great symbiosis that we talked about. I have a quote from John Walton on here. But the gods have created people to serve their needs. In response to such service, the gods protected faithful people and provided for them, like fertile fields. This is a give and take, not the same sort of fatherly love. Humans were more like cattle who were plowing the fields for the gods, and they would give the gods what they needed, and then the gods would repay them back. Here, yes, we had the description of God as Father. It's a familial kind of relationship. And then finally, Yahweh is holy. This one we're familiar with, Isaiah chapter 6. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. It's the only attribute used to describe God 3 times in the whole Bible. So if you ask what is the attribute of God in the Bible that is the most superlative in its description, God is not love, 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 or wrath, 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 or mercy, 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 or jealous, jealous, jealous. He's holy, holy, holy. And so that is the defining unique attribute of God. This is unlike the ancient gods who are engaging in carnal type activities. They're eating, they're drinking, they have emotions as fickle as humans. They are, bitter and jealous. And God is completely and utterly above all of that. Yahweh is. Yahweh is separate. Yahweh is not like us. And we are not like him, even though we sort of are, but that's an image thing. Do you read the way that the gods behaved? And it's very much like how humans would behave, just like humans with powers, sort of like the 5, 6, 7-year-olds who are playing. So this holiness, it's a word that's never used to describe the ancient gods. So that was another unique thing about the Israelite religion. Okay, so just about there. So what can we know about God from the Old Testament? God is the creator and the sustainer. You also, if you remember Colossians chapter 1, for by him all things were made, and through him all things hold together, consist. God is a jealous God. Only he is worthy of worship. There are other heavenly beings, but they are not gods to be worshipped. God has this unchallengeable plan in which humans, his nurtured creatures, the ones he cares for, have responsibilities. We'll get to that next week. God will redeem his people, and God is thrice holy. So those are some of the things that we learn about God from the Old Testament theology. And I have a question in the chat. Yes, I can share my slides. Okay, so I would say I'll give myself a C+ on finishing in time for the service. But are there any other questions or comments aside from I owe you a better explanation on Psalm 82?
Going once, twice.
Mark?
I was just gonna say we should come up with a definition next time of what's jealous and what's envy. Because I think maybe the other gods are envious of each other, but jealous is you're mine and I want you back, just like Gomer and
Right. Yes.
And they're often intertwined or they said like they mean the same thing, but they are different. So
Yeah.
Well, and the other gods are jealous of each other.
They're jealous of each other.
And where God is jealous for his people,
Yes.
it's a difference.
The jealousy, I skipped over that little bit on that slide there, but the jealousy is about the worship that's going to other gods. Which is, Zeus would be jealous of, or maybe like Athena might be jealous of Artemis. But not because of the worship that they're getting. It's because of, what maybe Zeus's favor that's on Artemis versus Athena, even though Zeus really loved Athena. So maybe I should flip that around. But they're standing within the hierarchy of the gods. They got jealous of that. Anything else? All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. We'll be back here next week.
yeah,